So today we're going to be looking at basically some simple automation, some simple processes to make sure that you're able to perhaps stop doing tasks that you end up repeating. And I'm a massive fan of this. And for those of you who've seen some of the webinars, I'll be talking about lists today, which is a particular focus and perhaps the key to how we can do things. So I'm just going to perhaps shape the picture and outline what we're going to cover in the next half an hour or so. So the way I look at it, when we're dealing with data and processes, there's kind of three elements. We've got information, we need to do something with it, and then we have data or something as an output, and that might go back around in a circle and you come to it again. So for today's webinar, I'm going to be focusing on forms and emails as being the triggers or the start of something. And we'll look at forms very quickly on that, and I've got a demo form for you to have a go at. Then we'll look at what we can do to actually process that with some power automation, and starting with the basics of a trigger. But to make something happen, you have to have a trigger point. Not referencing the television program on the other night. A trigger starts everything off. So that then would start a flow, and then that has an audit that results in a piece of data, and we're going to be putting the data into lists because that's where you can manipulate the data better. So that's what we're going to cover in the next few minutes. So we want to get you to get involved and to play along. So if you grab your phone, you can use your personal phone, scan the QR code, or we're popping the link into the chat as well. If you've got it, you can open the Q&A and you can be able to access the link, and you can fill in this very, very simple form. And all we've got is an options A to D and a text box, and the free text box. And that's all we're asking you to fill in, and that's all we're using it, because today I'm simplifying processes to make it as easy as possible for you all. And I'll just pop the form on screen now onto the question, so you can see the form. And yes, it's got some little snow animations because we are still in winter, and you can see the sort of form that you want to fill in. So you just select option, put a box in, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with forms and the power of forms, and you get responses as a result. You get a nice little pie chart and you get the responses, and you can download that, of course, into an Excel file. But that's only created a silo of data in many ways, and that's great for certain tasks and processes, but chances are you're going to need something more. So what more can you do with it? And I think that's the next thing, is what can you do once you've got data into a list? So again, I'm using very simplified forms and data for this. The principles are the same, and you can make these really complex, and I have done, and we use them on a daily basis. But when you take the export from a Microsoft form, you get an output like this on Excel, where the form automatically captures the start time. What time did they start to fill in the form? What time did they complete the form? And if you've done it within your organization only, it will actually capture the name of the user and their email address automatically. If it's a public facing form, it won't capture that. And then it's even got the last time they modified it and the options they took. So if you think about the form we put on, it was a simple ABCD options. It pops that in and it puts the data into there. So I can see 27 of you have filled in the form now, and I'll just bring that back in here just so you can see how quickly that data is coming live to me. 28 people filled it in, and many of you are favouring option B. You don't want to be predictable and go for option B. So there you go, you've got the form and it's done the word cloud. And if I did want to look at that data, I could download that data onto an Excel and away you go. So get rid of that form for a second. So how do you take that Excel and create something usable with a list? And lists is the key to this. So we're going to create a list from this. Now, if you're doing a very simple process, you might find it easier to start with the form, put some bits of data in there, and then build your list based on the output of the form. So looking at that Excel we've just seen, I'm going to import that into a list. So I've gone to create a new list, and I've click from Excel. Then the next thing up, it looks at all the columns in your Excel spreadsheet and tries to guess what to put them in. Now, it didn't recognize the date and time because of the way that the Excel had exported it. So I simply selected date and time out of the drop down, and it formatted it accordingly. If I'd done that the same there, it would have done the same. And you can see it's recognized a single line of text for the email and for the name, and on the next slide, it's thought a single line of text for the options. But the simple reality is I want that to be a choice of 4 fields. So I can change that to make that a choice of 4 fields by clicking on the button at the top, go into edit column, and I can put colors and formats and tell it the choices. And as soon as I click save, that then changes the format of that column on that list. So it's creating that formatting in there. So you can see now I've got a list of usable data. And that's what I created in the Blue Peter fashion before we started today's session. And that's created a usable list. And the reason we talk about lists as being so important, because once you have a list, you can do so much more with it. You can trigger other things to happen. You can create different views, and we'll cover that in a second. And you can integrate it into Teams, and of course, you can make that data Power BI available on Power BI. But let's have a look at the list that you've been doing and how I created that. So I'm just going to drag in another screen now. And this is always the challenge of doing live demonstrations. So at 12 o'clock when we started this, there was 4 fields in this list, and I'll show you it in the typical list format that you're all used to seeing it. So now you can see it's captured your data, and because I made it a publicly available form, I've not captured your email address and names automatically. I can see when you've all filled it in, and well done to everybody. That's an amazing response to have such a simple bit of data. And you can see without touching the Microsoft form, because you can see my live screen, the data is now in a list. With the formatting I've chosen, all your text inputs, and it's even for this one who said higher. I've clicked on that entry here. I can look at this entry, and I've created this as it's formatted. It's this entry was made automatically when Anonymous completed the form at 53 seconds past 3 minutes and 12 and added the above comments. So you can see I've done all that with automatic. That sounds like a bit of witchcraft, so let me show you what that does. This is Power Automate, and I can't code, but I can build Power Automates because they're big. Think of them as Lego boxes, as the way they work. So I've created 2 flows, one from a form, and that's the one I'm going to show you first. And you can see it's there, demo form for webinar. I've been really creative with the name of it. I'm going to click on that and open that up, and I created that this morning, as you can see, and I'm the only owner. One of the things I would say to you is, if you do use this, please share and collaborate with other people so that they can pick up if you go off. And you can see it's run history. You can see it's running, and it ran for 16 seconds a few minutes ago. Let me show you the flow. A flow is a process map in many ways, and I'll show you how that all fits together, and it's a very simple flow. So you've seen I've created the list, so I know where the data is going, I know where the data is coming from. The trick is, how do I get it in there? So I mentioned triggers before. A flow is started when you click a trigger, when a trigger is fired. So when you're building a flow, you start with the trigger. And this is what's called an automated flow. So it happens whenever somebody fills in the form and they've told it the name of the form to pick in. And then what it's going to do, when it gets that form trigger, it'll run away to that form and get the latest response, and then create an item in SharePoint. And again, I have to tell it which form again, which sounds a bit repetitive, but if you think about it, you could have a trigger that starts something else. It doesn't necessarily need to process that form. And I've told it to get the list of response, the latest list of response. And if you clicked on that, it would tell you that's exactly what it does. And then I'm going to create an item. So I'm going to create an item in the business engagement team, demo form for webinar list. That's the name of the list. And these are the fields. If I just drop the list back up on screen so you can see it. Here's the list that I made earlier. And those are the field names of the columns that I created a second ago. And they've appeared automatically in this item here. I haven't had to do any work. It's gone and looked at that list and said, what columns names are they? Put them down the side, and then it's asked me to put in the detail of what I want to fill in each of those columns and each of those fields. So I'll just take that one out in a second. And you can see here it's asking me to put, and I'm using the old designer. There is a new designer with AI. I prefer the old designer. You can take your choice on it. It's saying for completion time. I've clicked on it and it's now asking me, what do I want to put in there? I could just type in the time the form was filled in, and it would populate that field. But if you remember, I've made that column a date and time column. So I'm going to put in the submission time that the form was completed. And you can see down here, I've put the responder's email address there. If I clicked on this one, there's the field from the form, put that in, and then I've created a narrative here, which is going to go in the decision-making record, where I've actually created a sentence completed with bits of detail from the form. So that's the flow to get the demo into the data. That runs a second, and if you were filling in the form now, you'd see that would run, and you can actually look at the run flow and see the process work visually, and that pops the data in from the form. So you can see this one, it's read the inputs from the form, it's applied to each, and it's run off and got the data out of that form and started to populate each of the fields in the SharePoint list for me automatically, without having to do any manual processing of data. This all looks horrible. Don't worry about it. It's only a problem if you've got a bug or something like that, but you really don't. So you can see it's filled it all in, it knows all the detail, and it's popped it in. So that's great for structured data. But one of the things we also do, and Esther, if you would like, bear with me a second, I'd like you to fire that email in a second. I'll just click the test and show this one. I've also built a flow to take unstructured data and from an email. So this is the flow here. I'm just going to put it into test mode, and then Esther's going to press a button and we'll see the flow actually work. This works very simply, and I'll show you the flow in a second. Well, I'll put it into test manually. Okay, Esther, hit the email. So again, in typical Bluepeter fashion, Esther's sending an email to a shared inbox that we've agreed at the moment. So it's called the engagement inbox. And that's just going to be waiting for that trigger to fire. And as soon as that email lands in that inbox, hopefully touch wood, it'll start to work. There we go, you can fire it. It's taken all of 0.2 of a second to process this. So when a new email arrived in the shared inbox, it did that, and then it went away and converted the HTML in that email into text. Then created an output from that text using the compose, and you can see here this is the email she sent, and I'll be able to show you that in a second. And then it's done exactly the same as I did with the form. It's used the form, create an item to do that. So let me show you that very simple flow on the edit screen so you can see what it looks like. So again, I'll go to the old designer because that's just how I prefer it at the moment. So when a new email arrived into the engagement inbox, and because I'm demonstrating, I'm specified that it would only come from 3 people I would allow it to work from. And for some reason, it's decided Richard Atherton's old account. It then took the body of the email into HTML for text. Then took the output of that body, you can see the symbol matches, to create a piece of code that the system could then deal with. And then it's created the same item in the same list by putting the receive time from the email. And again, these are all fields. So if I clicked out of this one, deleted that one, and I click into here, you can see here it's suggesting the fields from the email, because that's what's triggered it, that I might want to pull in there. So I'll put the name in the same. But they've not filled in the options value. And then I put a little narrative into the box that what they filled in from the subject. So I've dragged out the output of the text they put in the body and put the subject in, formatted it. And what I've also done is marked the source value column as being from an email. So let's have a look at that on the list again now. So back over to the list, find my lists, too many things open, the Challenge Live demo. I'll refresh this list. Huge audience, now waiting for the gods. So scroll all the way down, hopefully it's already there. A lot of data in here. So there's the email that Esther's just sent to the engagement inbox. Because the Power Automate knows to look for the email address and put the email address in that column, it's also put the email address into the name because I didn't have a separate bit to extract that. You can start to build that. It hasn't filled in that column because there wasn't anything on the email it does. And then you can see the narrative that I've typed in there has been automatically populated into the field, and it's flagged it as the source has been from an email. I can actually look at this field in detail now. So if I click open this entry, and this is where it gets really clever. Again, it's running a little slow because there's so many of you filling in the process. So you can see now that all the items for this particular record in the list are here. So it's filled in the names, it's got the modified value, it's filled in the name, and I can see here. So that's all she's put in on the email. Yes, it's put all the extra HTML. If I spent more time, I could strip that out and tidy it all up, not a problem. And the decision-making record. This is a really important field on lists. I've made this an appending field. So it basically never sort of overwrites the content of that column, and date and timestamps who updates it, and then that field. So there's one that I've put in earlier. And what you can also do is send it to other people to an action, and this is where we talk about it being usable for things like the neighbourhood policing responses for an inbox. Imagine this managing your group inbox for neighbourhood policing or any other department. It automatically populates it into the list space, fills in the details, and then you can actually tag in a colleague to actually take an action, to pick it up, etc., and respond to it. And then all the details are recorded next to this particular record here. Or again, if Esther came in here and wanted to update the decision making record, she could update that, and it's all in one place. I did say I was racing through this. You could spend hours doing this, but perhaps this gives you an idea of the sort of things you can then do with a list once you've got it in. You could create a trigger that says when an item is updated on a list to a certain status, do another trigger and do another process. But also with lists, you can create views. So this is a simple gallery view of all the data you've just put in there. But one of the most useful ones might be the board view. So you can see here, the option A, B, and C that you've all filled in has automatically populated. I'm still looking at the same list. I'm just looking at a different view of it. I can go to the gallery view or the list view or the board view. And let's say this item here, and I'm saying actually that relates to option A, it might be an inquiry. Simply dragging that field into there has now made it update that column as being option A. It's actually put the data into that field. I'll just show you that again for ease. I'll drag it back out of option A and put it back into unassigned. That same item, that status has now changed again back to what it was before. It hasn't got a value in that field. So then just simply dragging things from one column to another actually updates the record as you go along. And again, you can click on that record, go in, see all the entries, tag it in for a colleague and manage it through that. Lists are also ridiculously powerful for other integrations. You can see if you open it up in SharePoint, you can have other automations, Power Apps and Power BIs. But I've actually created a Power BI from this list as well. And this is a very simple one. Again, if I just refresh the screen, because this is what I built before we started, you can see the headcount was 4. Give it a second. And you can imagine if you can have multiple things filling in the same list of source of data, that means you've got one version of the truth. You can start to analyze, you can start to kick off processes, and you can build all those things. So this was the Power BI dashboard that I built very simply based on those handful of fields on that column, on those lists. And now all of a sudden, give it time. I am running quite a few things at the same time here to get us going. It will pick it up in a second. Just picking up on the question from Dave Ballard that we got there, noted they're in US format. Decent, yeah, there is something around that. You need to talk to one of your technical specialists about date formats, but they do seem to work out in the long run once you get your formats working properly. So there you go. Because you've filled in all those forms, the emails have popped in. You can see here now that 91.67% of people have used the form. We've had 3 entries on the email. Again, everybody's favouring options A, B, C there, and I've got the email addresses, and it's even trying to do a clever little narrative where it could do. The idea of today was to give you an idea of what you potentially can do using Power Automate lists and data. I've covered a hell of a lot in a very short period of time there. Lists are one of the most powerful tools in SharePoint. The data is held in there. It's subject to all the MOPI rules, the retention rules. Think of each of these individual records as a separate Word document being managed in SharePoint, because that's what they are. They're SharePoint items, and nice to see our police test there. Simple way of doing it. NCA are in the house. That's fantastic. We can do some analytics on that if we wanted to. But this is a really simple way of being able to do things. And as I said before, you could have an automation, and we've tried this, where when somebody emails a group inbox, it reads the email, pops it into the Teams channel, allocates it to somebody using an adaptive card. You can have it firing emails, filling in Excel spreadsheets. A massive plea for me, if you're managing a list of data, don't manage it in Excel, manage it in a list. You'll get so much more out of it. If you're doing financial accounting, that's where you need your Excel. And you can have all sorts of triggers built, and you can have the same 2 different triggers from the same form being filled in as well. And that's something we've used really to a good effect in PDS. If you attend one of our big events, you'll be asked to fill in an evaluation form. That automatically goes into the evaluation list, so I can run my Power BI dashboard to understand the value of the events and are we achieving that. But it also sends an update to the business engagement manager about your feedback. So if there's anything that needed following up, we can do. I can see a few more questions popping in there, so let me see what I can do to answer some of those. Will this continuously populate with new responses over coming days, or do you have to repeat and do it at regular intervals? Thanks, Paul. That's a really great question. If you've got a form and you just leave that form open, people can still carry on completing that form, and then you'd have to download the Excel every time you want it. And that's fine if you're doing it. If you've got a flow running, that flow will automatically, every time it's run, for as long as that flow is active, populate the list for you. So again, it's not a matter of importing the data. The flow is doing its trigger the moment somebody fills in that form. So as soon as the form's been filled in, that's when it goes, right, there's more information there. I need to provide that information to the list, and fires it away. And that does that automatically until you stop that form. It does warn you if you get any error messages for that as well. That does help massively. Okay, so question there from Kev Lincoln about citizen development. Again, what we're trying to do is just say, look, use this webinar to explain to people why you can do it. This isn't citizen development almost. This is basic automations. We're not talking about power apps here. This is basic workflows that you can do things with. So do have a think about how you can use this webinar as an example. Think about where you can do this. I've tried to make this a non-technical one to do this. Note a question about forms and Power Automate, fantastic and simple data capture. If you have a long form, you need complex data, or specifically want to capture data from the AD, the Active Directory, using the front end lists. So yeah, kind of get that. This is something I use a lot, where I tell it to go and get the user's details if it's an internal form, and to populate the lists with that. Something I do on a regular basis, and it works really well. The date and time format will cover that one. You can amend the date and time yourself. That's great. Can you move the data up and down the rows or change the column order? You can do an awful lot with a list once you've built it, and to make it change. So you can move them around. You can move this list around. So you've got column settings. You can move it to the right. You can move it to the left. Of course, you can just view the list by alphabetical order, by filter it by, I want to see A to B filtered by everybody who selected option D. Those are there. So it's a bit like the smart filters in Excel. So you can do all those things in the list itself without going any further. So yeah, lots of choices to do. And you've got lots of choices in terms of your column types. The appended field one is the most valuable one, I think, there, because that's the one. If I show you the settings on that one, this is the multiple lines of text. I've been told it can use rich and enhanced data, so you can put hyperlinks to documents on SharePoints. And this is the button that every time you fill it in, it makes it add more data to it. So there's an awful lot you can do with this, and we'll do more on lists as we go on. And Dave Bell makes the point that SharePoint is basically a big list, and that's what it is. SharePoint is majorly a list thing. I will come back to other questions, but it is getting that time at the end of the webinar. If you've got any more questions, do reach out to your business engagement manager, who are always happy to help and give you more information and signpost you in the right direction. It's always at this time of the meeting, it's 5 minutes to go, that I need to cover what's coming up and some other things that you can cover. So we have got the Digital Summit in coming up in September. We are now open for pre-registration, and we're nearly 100 people have already pre-registered. Scan the QR code, head over to the link, get it on the website, and you'll be able to get all the updates as they come. We are just planning the sponsorship packages and exhibition at the moment, so those will be going out very soon. We're not opening it up for registration for another few weeks yet, but as soon as we do, you'll be the first ones to be able the opportunity to register and join us in September in Brighton. In the next couple of weeks, we've got an awful lot coming on, and there's a much anticipated webinar next week where West Midlands Police are going to be joining us and sharing their journey to modern SharePoint on their intranet. A fantastic example of what can be achieved. We have got an event tomorrow and the next day, which is now full, unfortunately, but we will do a recap of the next couple of days in a few weeks' time. We've got a fantastic example of people using the technology to help them achieve some real outputs with the he for she in Kent Police and how they've been using 365. We've got BAPCO coming up, so those of you visitors there, have to head over and find us in the BAPCO at BAPCO. And again, the security and policing event is a huge event at Farnborough. PDS is going to be there engaging with stakeholders internationally, nationally around the work we're doing. And you can see some of the other events coming up that we've got planned at the moment. As always, we'd really welcome your feedback on the webinars. If there's something you want to follow up, you can either fill in the feedback form, and guess what? There's a Power Automate and a form sitting behind that. Or if you need to get in touch with the business engagement team, and again, Power Automates and Power BI and all sorts of things are working in the wizardry in the background. Whenever you fill in the form on the PDS website or scan that QR code, it creates a way of us being able to help you to make sure you get the answers that you need. There's your business engagement team. Do reach out to them if you want to know more. If you're having problems accessing this sort of technology, you want to learn from other forces who've started to unlock the value of this technology, that's already been paid for. It's within the licenses. I've shown you nothing today that's not within, that's got a premium connector. There's no costs to using this other than you do. And you can start to get some real benefits and time saving by using this. So remember to subscribe to our webinars, and we hope to see you at our next one in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks everybody for joining us today.